And it's my intent maybe to briefly cover some of the things that we're working on as a community. I might talk about some of my initiatives, but really they're our initiatives. We don't really do anything on our own. And above all, let you have some questions. I'll do my best. I've looked at some of the things with your neighborhood plan and some of the capital projects that are going on and some of the growth and development issues that are here in this neighborhood, at the base, your neighbor at Roslyn, etc. As county manager, I always have to start out with some of the maybe the gloomier news first, which is unfortunately our budget is still tight in Arlington and not even as bad as others. As you know, we've probably been through 2 or 3 years of budget really cutbacks. Actually, I think this fiscal year, fortunately, the budget was adopted before I got here. That was very nice. They dragged out the selection process just to the right point, right up to the budget got adopted. But actually, we've actually reduced the budget by about 10% in the last couple of years overall, about $20 million. So, and about 160 positions, and those are real ones. I mean, not in police officers and dispatchers and so forth, but in every possible position that we can, in parks and recreation and libraries and all the back office things that we can. And I would submit that we're still doing okay in spite of that, but I do need to bring it up. The economy is getting a little bit better. We are beginning to see, as we are in Roslyn, some new development occurring, and I think that's a very good sign for the economy, even though that brings up planning and development issues. But I do have to say we're already starting with that process right now. I literally met today with the school superintendent, Pat Murphy, to talk about what we look for. I don't think we're going to be seeing quite the dismal news that we've seen, but as you might expect, we do have an imbalance. So we'll be trying to maintain services, try to provide some pay hikes, and then to accommodate some of the new projects that everybody loves. So I just wanted to bring that up. I think since I've been here, a whole lot has happened. I mentioned that the budget was adopted just before. A 6-year capital budget was adopted right after. Had a really good meeting with the Planning Commission on the long-range plan for them, and I'll get into that in a minute. And now we're well into, we have the East Falls Church plan that was presented, the Crystal City plan that is in the process of being presented, and then also the Roslyn Heights plan is coming up. And those are just a few of the issues, things going on with Crystal City having to do with the streetcar, the connection to Potomac Yard, the connection ultimately along Columbia Pike. Actually, as of this week, the Virginia DOT approved the transfer of Columbia Pike to Arlington. Doesn't sound like much, but when Arlington itself can control that corridor, that's good news. Actually, I also got news that along with that I believe that the state has committed to and now will do the funding of Route 50. I guess those improvements are on the table. I think those are much needed as one of the stimulus type packages. But I think that we, even in these few months, we've jumped right into the issues of development, and not just in Crystal City, but what would happen in East Falls Church, what would happen here in Roslyn. I've had a chance to even tour this neighborhood. My wife and I have walked this neighborhood. In fact, Thursday I'm having breakfast with Colonel Carl Kaufman, who I guess he's the garrison commander here, and he and I go back. He was the garrison commander in Savannah at Fort Hunter. So he and I were like, uh-oh, here it goes again. But actually our breakfast is intended to hear about what's going on at the base, hear about what projects that we have together. I was happy to hear that the tree survey is being done. So I hope that even tonight, if you have things you might want me to bring up with Colonel Kaufman, that we can do that. I would envision after that, we had a reach-out meeting. Catherine Condon, the new director at the cemetery, really one of her first days at work, asked me to come over, so I've met with her. So I would envision actually getting a little process going with Colonel Kaufman, with the cemetery, with county staff, so that we can talk about, you know, joint planning of projects, how operations work. You know, just we're all neighbors here, and how can we work together on the projects that we face. Okay, so what are those? I mentioned Crystal City. Clearly, some of the big issues there have to do with density and heights, which are on the boards. But how do we then use those to keep the businesses and the residential, you know, component of Crystal City vibrant? I think that's always going to be a challenge. We want our employment centers to be vibrant, but we want to make our streetscapes safer, more attractive, keep open space intact, improve that open space, continue to improve the transportation network to lower traffic, and to have more people use transit, both employees, residents, and visitors. And then to extract all that the market will bear, but no more, of what are reasonable community benefits from the developments, to support affordable housing from those. And I'm really talking about these because that's exactly the same template, as you know, that goes on in each of the sector plans, but also individual development plans. And the devil is in, how does that process work? Is it predictable for the owner development community, but also predictable and fruitful for our community to get that which is justified? It's a little bit more difficult nowadays, because I think anyone would know we don't face the same economic and development environment that we saw. I think before, almost any demand would ultimately be met, and I don't see that same sort of atmosphere. So I don't say that to be defeatist, but I say that it's going to take even more careful attention to our standards, to the details of design, making sure that even dense areas, that when they abut residential, that there's residential protection, that there's visual step downs, that there's good design, et cetera, and that we keep our streetscapes, their walkability, their bikeability, their connectivity, that we keep those things intact. Those are all important to us, and I know in reading the literature that it's important to you, whether that's parking, or whether it's tree planting, or how streets connect, et cetera, et cetera. How do we work with the business community to keep them vibrant but not cause noise or disruption or traffic that harm the neighborhood. Actually, this week I met with the Planning Commission. I was on their agenda to say, what do you see as manager that could help this process? It has been very laborious. Oftentimes it's involved multiple loopbacks. My suggestion was twofold. One, which I think we're pretty good at, is to say, what do we think will come out of this in terms of height or mass or density or basic street configurations? What are the design, not specify what it'll look like, but what do we want the components to be? I think the part that's probably more problematic is to say, how do we be clear about the process up front? We got to the end of East Falls Church and we said, well, wait a minute, how much board direction did we have? Is the neighborhood on board? Who was involved in this process, et cetera? I think we should charter that process and then have a group that helps that facilitation all the way through. So when we start running into miscommunications or looping back, that we can try to get our course back on track. Everyone gets their idea built into the process, but maybe, as I said, maybe we can do that in a couple of loops rather than 5 or 6 loops, which can be frustrating for everyone, not just the developers who probably gripe the most, but also for residents who say, well, why would this take us a year to do this, or 2 years? Can we do it just as well, but do it in a shorter time frame? So we're looking for facilitation, we're looking for mediation, education about the basic ground rules, and then continued checkbacks. If you see somebody in a process who walked away from the table, well, let's find out why that might be. If we're losing the consensus within a neighborhood like this one, what can we do to keep that consensus together? How do we stop one person who's determined to that they get the main vote or the veto. Well, they get to put a whole lot of input, but let's try to avoid having any one person or party that gets to veto the deal, if it in fact is a good one. But we have a very activist agenda here. There's no doubt. I mean, the list. I mean, I can go on and on. It's we're working on a project right now with the Park Service to get a boat facility down on Potomac, just below, right in the vicinity of Theodore Roosevelt Island. There are a number of projects, as you know, that are going on within Roswell, and at the same time looking at how transit and mobility works, how streetscape works, how urban design works, what will be the heights. There are those who've even said, well, let's just redo the whole sector plan. And I said, well, I won't make the final decision, but sector plans are major investments and they take a lot of time. Don't throw out a whole plan when really we just want to work on parts of that plan to make it better. Another project, and I'm going to try to keep it short here, another initiative is I've met with some of the leadership of the Neighborhood Conservation Group, because that's a process by which people can get projects in. That can take time. It can become frustrating. So how can we make that process a little bit more transparent and not let people get frustrated? I think as I look at Arlington's capital budget, sometimes everything gets thrown in the pot. There'll be areas that are below standard. There's not connectivity by sidewalks. There's not street lighting. There are inequities, or maybe we don't even meet code in one of the parks. Like we don't have an accessible facility. Then those get bunched in with projects that are true enhancements, and then everybody sort of competes. I think that competition will still go on, but maybe we can talk about standards and which part of each neighborhood is below the standard, or where there is a basic inequity, and what do we do with that? Then where are there opportunities to make our facilities better for the future, and then what will the enhancements be?